measuring things in the long term is clearly the right thing to do. But the practical reality of particularly a lot of online display activity is that it will be judged, at least in part, and for better or worse, in the short term. So how do we ensure that the right kinds of online display are used? And how can we, and what role do digital news brands play in that mix? So Newsworks have built a body of evidence that proves the effectiveness of news brands. So that includes the IPA study that Peter's just taken you through, but also the ROI study from last year, which looks at the effects of print as a news brand channel. But both these things struggle a little bit to include specifically the effect of digital news brands. So this is the challenge that Newsworks set us, to demonstrate the ROI of digital news brands. And my first thought when I read the brief was, okay, interesting, we can do that. And my second thought was, interesting, how are we going to do that? Because it is a bit of a challenge, and there's two particular things that we wanted to make sure that we'd covered off and understood. So as we know, in theory, the increase in digital advertising has made it easy to prove or to demonstrate a link between, on the one side, investment, and on the other side, results. Of course, as we know in practice, demonstrating a link is not the same as proving effectiveness. So the two challenges that we had to overcome. First, the display landscape. Okay, so as Peter subtly alluded to, the grubby parts of online display, it's really complicated. There's a lot of steps between publisher and marketer, with a lot of people adding value through data and insight, and arguably extracting value and taking that out. But digital or online display comprises lots of different content in lots of different places, consumed on lots of different devices, all of which give a different experience to the person consuming it. And it's really hard to separate out digital news brands from this amorphous mass of online display. So on some occasions, digital news brands may be part of the online display mix. On other occasions, they won't. They might be specifically included, but equally, a lot of the time they're not. But impressions might end up on news brand sites because they're part of an overall buy. And the ubiquity of programmatic trading means that in a lot of cases, the content the ad is placed to is deemed far less important than the who that ad is being served to. That's the first problem we need to overcome. The second, and again, as Peter mentioned earlier, is levels of investment. So historic investment in digital news brands is, compared to investment in an overall campaign, typically quite low. And it's also typically bought as part of an overall campaign, which means that there's a lack of variation in data, which makes measuring it more difficult. So if we think about measuring things through econometrics, that relies on significant levels of investment and variation in data over time in order to make a robust measurement effect. So how do we do it? Okay, so in summary, we needed to find or create sufficient investment in digital news brands in order to enable us to measure things robustly. The first thing we did was look at content partnerships. So these typically have a higher proportion of media value delivered through digital, and that digital might include display, it also includes social, and it might include digital content, as well as ad placements. Levels of investment are often high enough for robust measurement, and the phasing of different components in a partnership provides enough natural variation to enable us to measure them robustly in things like econometrics. So in the case study I'm going to talk you through shortly, for Westfield, we measured this using an existing econometric model, which ourselves and Westfield have been using together since 2014, and which won the Media Week Gold Award in 2015 for the best use of econometrics. The second thing we wanted to do was to try and really understand the impact of digital news brands as part of an overall display campaign and compare the effectiveness of different elements of online display. And the way to do that was through digital attribution. So this is a perfect way to understand the role of news brands within a digital journey and the effectiveness of news brands at generating an online sale relative to other kinds of display. So while there are pros and cons to attribution models, and this isn't necessarily the place to go through all those pros and cons, there are good ones and there are bad ones, and I think the ones that are data-driven, that include all the non-paid channels as well as the paid channels, and take into account all those people who don't buy something as well as those who do. Those models can provide valuable insight on the relative effectiveness of different pieces of activity. So that's what we're focusing on here. In the case study I'm going to take you through, we work with Visual IQ, who are a market-leading independent digital attribution provider, to measure, optimize O2's marketing activity. And by planning the measurement and reporting in advance, we were able to track, measure, and understand the impact of digital news brands. Okay, so onto the Westfield case study. This is a long-term partnership that Westfield have with ESI. It's been going since 2014. The elements of the partnership have evolved over time, but include print ads, digital and print content, including the agenda, includes social and print promotions, digital display ads on sites, and content traffic drivers. And there's lots of variation in that data over a 3-year time period to enable us to get a really robust measurement of the partnership and the different elements of it. The partnership itself is not designed to drive short-term effects. So it's designed to reach new customers to Westfield and drive increases in footfall. Also to position Westfield as a destination, communicate the breadth of its offering across fashion, food, leisure and entertainment, and drive credibility through association, so borrowing the brand values of the Evening Standard and positioning Westfield as a multidimensional retailer. The overall objective is to help build Westfield as a brand by using the offline and digital content to help do that. And finally, one of the objectives is to deliver media value, because by investing in a long-term partnership with a news brand, that delivers better value beyond the traditional campaign plan. So before we get into the hard business results of the campaign, I think it's worth reflecting on some of those objectives that I just talked about and how the campaign performs against those. So actually, as I said, the partnership isn't all about generating short-term response, and measuring some of the brand measures over the longer term, we can see that the campaign has succeeded in improving awareness, consideration, perception, and the understanding of Westfield's offering across those 4 key and other brand measures. So it's been successful in what it was set out to do, but ultimately, what we're here to try and demonstrate is that it has a measurable return on investment as well. So the first thing to say is that these are cost per visit numbers, so lower is better. In case anyone's looking at short bars. Okay, so what we can see here is that the news brand partnerships that Westfield have had with the Evening Standard are the second most effective channel and the second most efficient channel at driving incremental visitors into Westfield. Okay, so a very strong result as part of a campaign mix. This is one of the reasons why Westfield continue doing this partnership over time. The other reason is that actually, if we look at the performance over the last 3 years, what we see is that the partnership in 2016 is actually 36% more efficient than it was back in 2014, and it's been getting continually better, which demonstrates, I think, in this case, the long-term partnerships have delivered better results for the client, and the association between Westfield and the Evening Standard has helped drive those brand effects as well as the increased business effects. And finally on this, I want to take you back to the chart I showed you just before, and perhaps most interestingly out of this case study, what we see is that the overall partnership performs better than the sum of its parts. So if we take social in isolation, display in isolation, and print in isolation, actually the partnership performs about 50% better in terms of generating incremental visitors to Westfield than the individual parts on their own. I think this shows the importance of partly a content partnership, but also of having digital news brands within an overall campaign mix. Okay. On to the second case study, and we're going to talk about O2. So in Q2 2017, very recently, O2 ran a campaign which was designed to increase in-market awareness and consideration amongst new customers. So the campaign was across a number of channels, including print, out-of-home, search, digital display. We're going to focus on the digital display element here. It was across their full product range. And as part of the overall campaign, a digital display plan was created. And this had the objectives of, firstly, delivering a high level of viewability. We'll leave out whether that should be a given or not from this context. Driving scale and frequency across the overall campaign. Allowing detailed targeting possibilities, but also delivering an efficient cost per connection. So a connection being O2's measure of a new order. So this campaign gave us the ideal opportunity to specifically test digital news brands and compare them to other elements of the digital display buy. So we added 5 news brands to the campaign, ensured that they receive a specific level of investment. We tracked the impressions separately for each news brand, allowing us to measure individual ones as well as the overall effect of news brands. The primary KPI for the campaign and the basis on which the campaign was optimized was ads in view, but clearly it was also important to generate sales. Now, just going back to what something that Peter mentioned earlier, ultimately this is a short-term measure of sales, but I think, and as I mentioned at the start of this, ultimately, to a greater or lesser degree, all campaigns will be measured, at least in part, on the sales that they generate in the short to medium term. And in order to understand which elements of online display we should include as part of that plan, it's important to understand how they perform relative to each other. So before I get into the results of this specific campaign, I think it's really important to say that we know from O2's econometrics that digital display is a really important channel for them. So it's the channel that has the 3rd highest ROI. And without revealing investment levels, I can say that that's on the back of a significant spend. So for O2, they are both effective and efficient. And this comes from Accenture's econometric modeling for O2. We therefore know that, from the econometrics, we also know that display has an impact across all sales channels. Therefore, measuring it through digital attribution isn't a perfect way of doing it, but it can be used to compare the relative effectiveness of different elements of it. So the attribution software allows us to understand where news brands fit into an overall digital consumer journey. And what we can see here is that news brands rarely are the first interaction on that campaign, and even more rarely are the last interaction, which in traditional ways of measuring digital activity would undervalue them significantly. They tend to appear in the middle of a journey, which means that they should be used to continue the conversation with new customers and in-market prospects. We can also look at other data sources to show us what happens when we look at different devices. So this uses Atlas's people graph. So that uses Facebook login data to understand to match people across devices and understand how people's exposure to advertising on one device might lead to them converting on a different device. And what we see here for news brands is that 24% more people convert on a different device to that they use to consume. So for news brands in particular, the devices that people are using to consume their news brand content are less likely to be the devices that they convert on, which means that they are typically likely to be undervalued in attribution models unless this cross-device attribution effect is taken into account. So coming back to the overall objective of the campaign, which was to drive overall viewability. And again, this is a cost per metric, so lower is better. What we see is that news brands delivered a 10% better, 10% more cost-effective ads in view than the rest of the display buy. So as part of the campaign objective, news brands were more effective than the rest of the campaign at delivering that objective. And finally on this, if we look at the actual results of the campaign, so again, these are cost per connection. And what we can see here is we can compare each individual news brand that was bought as part of the campaign, along with the other publishers, programmatic specialists, rich media specialists that form part of the campaign. So the performance of individual news brands varied, but news brands took 4 of the top 6 performing publishers or programmatic specialists. And when we aggregate them up to the overall effectiveness, actually we can see that news brands' effectiveness was essentially identical to the rest of the campaign buy. And that's important because it shows that news brands can deliver a short-term sales driving performance in line with other elements of display activity. So in addition to the longer-term benefits that Peter's talked about as to why we should include digital news brands, this gives us some evidence to show that in the short term, they can also deliver those results and add to that bank of evidence that digital news brands should be on campaign plans. Okay, so in summary, what have we learned from these 2 case studies? Firstly, digital news brands are effective, and that's whether we judge them over a 3-year period on brand or business metrics, or whether we measure them in the very short term on delivering digital sales as part of a display buy. They deliver a measurable return on investment. Second thing, that news brand partnerships that include digital have a greater effect than the sum of their parts. So including digital news brands as part of an overall campaign buy improve the effectiveness of the whole. And finally, we know that digital news brand audiences do deliver cost-efficient online sales on a par with other display activity and should be included as part of a plan. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Dennis.
I'm going to have some questions. So I'm going to ask Peter if you'll come back onto the stage. So there are some raving mics around. Who's going to be first? Simon Redican, I might have known. What's your question?
Hi, it's Simon Redican from PAMCO. It's a question for Ben and Peter, I guess, and Denise, if you want to go.
I won't get a word in into these 2.
What do you think's the single biggest obstacle to anybody changing their behaviour based on the rational evidence you're presenting? And I'm thinking of agencies and advertisers in particular.
Can we just qualify the question? Changing their behaviour in which respect?
Well, all the evidence that you've been presenting for a number of years now suggests that it pays to make a long-term investment and focus on that. But increasingly what we see in the market is a focus on short-termism. What do you think is the number one thing that's driving that?
I think the battle will only be won when we take it to the C-suite properly, when CEOs and CFOs are fully acquainted with the dangers of short-termism. Because a lot of the marketers that I work with kind of understand this. You know, they say to me, "Look, Peter, I get all of this, but you know, my arm is up my back." So they're being lent on to deliver short-term results, and you know, huge sympathies. If your boss is telling you that he needs a good quarter, or he's very focused on, you know, his Google metrics or whatever, you're going to have to follow suit. So I think that is the short answer to it. Take the battle up the chain.
Yeah, I agree. Peter and I had a conversation at Havas about 4 months ago, and I think fundamentally it is a an increasingly short-term culture at advertisers. I think also the tenure of CMOs is getting shorter, and therefore their incentive to invest in long-term brand building is decreasing. I think from the stuff that I just talked about, so for digital news brands specifically, actually I think that part of the reason for that is that I don't think the question's been asked specifically. So that was the first time I'd been asked the question, how effective are digital news brands? And I don't know if people in the room differ on that, but unless people are asking those questions, then they're not going to get answers, and they're not going to understand it.
Yeah, I think there's a problem that people are not asking the right questions. People are not, in science and stuff, you set up an experiment very explicitly about what you're going to measure. And actually, we ended up having to do that for O2 because when you originally looked at the data, you couldn't actually separate out digital news brands. So there's a lot of things that are hampering even before you get to looking at what effect they have. So I think there's definitely a structural thing in terms of marketing and the short-termism, but I think there's also a measurement problem, because if you don't ask the right questions, you won't ever be able to get any answers at all, never mind whether you like the answers or not.
I mean, there is a bigger and other long-term battle here, which is to educate the kind of digital engineers and the whole machine, the digital machine out there, into the about the benefits of long-term effects. Because I think a lot of the people who are developing the new tools and tricks and the thinking in companies like Facebook and Google they come from technical backgrounds. They are engineers, they're code writers, software people. So they don't necessarily get this. And I think on a deep level, many of them actually are somewhat disdainful of the soft arts of marketing. This whole idea of emotional persuasion doesn't sit comfortably with somebody from a hard engineering background. And I say that as somebody myself who has an engineering degree. I know the beast. I know how much they dislike the idea that I could be persuaded to buy something emotionally and that it's not all driven by facts and information. They hate that at a visceral level. You've got to kind of, persuade the people. Who are the heroes? I mean, I had a conversation the other day with some people from Facebook, and they said, look, the heroes of this organisation are the engineers. Everyone else is backroom. And, and although that organisation, I think, is making huge strides to understanding this, until you get the people who are really the heroes of the organisation fully behind the way marketing works, then I think we'll still have limited progress. So there's a lot that has to happen. But we're making progress. We're getting there eventually.
Any other questions? Any from the dress circle?
Hi there, I'm Dan Matthews from OMD. You talked about there's a lack of brand building and it's more short-termism now. Obviously, we're moving to an age where people are spending more time on digital devices, and I think the way they consume media is changing. Do you think, Peter, this is probably for you, but interested as well, Ben, in your thoughts, do you think that agencies and advertisers haven't really understood how to build brands in a digital space where there is less time, that we don't have the joys of 30-second ads or double-page spreads to do that job now?
I think that certainly has been the case. I think they're learning fast. I mean, I'm certainly going to throw this one at Ben because I want to hear what he has to say about this. But I think the learning is there. I mean, the video revolution through social, for instance, is a big part of that learning. I think there is a growing realization that we haven't used the digital tools and channels wisely because we've been so seduced by the short-term metrics, but all of that is beginning to change. So I think I don't want to dwell too much on that. I think that is a very valid criticism of what has happened over the last decade. I think it's decreasingly valid looking forward, and I'm very much hopeful that as time goes by, we'll get better and better at doing it. And there is good evidence. I mean, we are beginning to see really interesting examples of data-driven, which in a sense is the hard end of this short-term thinking, but there is increasing evidence of where data-driven marketing is taking a longer-term outlook and using data actually not just for short-term click kind of effects, but for brand building. So I'm, as ever, the optimist. I think we'll learn from great experience, and hopefully we'll get more and more fantastic case studies of success where digital channels were used not with that early way of thinking of short-termism, but used to build brands. And I think then we'll all move forward. But Ben, I don't know if you have any comments on that. Am I wildly optimistic, or do you think there really is a changing understanding going on out there?
I think that, to your point, I think there has to be going forward. I think that, again, without wanting to, bang the TV drum as an example, again, the evidence suggests that still an awful lot of people are watching an awful lot of TV, and that therefore building brands doesn't need to fundamentally change, I would suggest. But what I do think is that at the moment there are isolated examples of brands and agencies trying to build brands digitally. And I think that there are some good case studies of that, but what there doesn't exist at the moment is a bank of evidence that tells us the best way to do that. So whereas that's well understood, and has been well understood for a number of years, it's not understood how to do that in digital. So what I think actually the driver for this needs to be is some more experimentation, and actually some it needs agencies and marketers to bring some evidence forward as to what works in that sphere and what doesn't.
It's I think it was really interesting in the O2 example, the case study, is that the device used to convert is much less likely to be the device used for consumption. So I think there needs to be a greater understanding of the relationship between consumption and conversion, and I don't think we've really grappled with that yet, because actually, like Ben says, we had to do a specific experiment to get those learnings out, and I don't think always that happens enough. I think I would call for more experiments. Ben, I'd like to ask you one, which you said that you'd never been asked the question that we asked before. What do you think that struck you most about the process of going through it and what we've actually seen today?
I think as I alluded to at the start, in principle it's quite easy. But actually in practice, once you start thinking about it, it is quite challenging. And I think the part that struck me most was the complexity of actually trying to separate out digital news brands from online display. And you could extend that to any other part of online display as well, because it's not as if the rest of it is all one amorphous mass either. So trying to find ways to understand that was the most challenging thing. So there's lots of attribution models that exist. From lots of different specialist providers, from lots of the big tech companies, obviously have potentially vested interests. But what none of them do as a matter of course is to try and understand context. So it's very rare that context, i.e. where an ad is alongside what content it's placed, will be considered as part of an attribution model. It's all about the audience, who that person was, when that ad was served, and what happened on the rest of that journey. And I think actually one of the big things that that came to my mind was actually how do we start to try and understand context as part of and try and build that into digital measurement as part of what we do.
All right, well, thank you very much to our first two speakers, Peter and Ben. I hope you'll join with me in thanking them again.